Welcome to Bump Set Chat, the podcast where volleyball professionals come on and share their stories, experiences, and advice. And today I'm super excited. I got Tyler Ray, a pro jump coach, former pro dunker, and the creator of Art of Jumping to come on and share his story. Welcome.
I appreciate that, Barry. Thanks for having me, man. It's nice. I've been watching some of your clips come through my feed, so to be on here is an honor, man. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, the way we start things off is we do 3 random questions. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So as a Canadian, is Tim Hortons overrated?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes, just a little bit.
All right. So now you walk into a room, the TV's on. What movie or TV show will stop you in your tracks and you just got to sit down and it just sucks you back in?
Oh my goodness. You know what? Right now we are, I'll go movie route. We're back into the world of Harry Potter with my son right now.
Oh, nice.
So if I hear that kind of prologue come on, the Harry Potter music, I'm probably stopped dead in my tracks right now for sure. I love it. Yeah. I'm definitely a Harry Potter nerd for sure.
Now, is your son reading the books or are you guys just going through the movies?
Reading the book. So we are now into the 4th book, and we kind of finish a book and then we watch the subsequent movies. So no, we're really enjoying it around here right now.
Yeah. Last question. Most unique place you've had a dunking contest?
Would be Moscow, Russia.
Holy
and
cow.
I was part of the World Dunk Contest there back in 2012. So I was invited out at the time as one of the 12 best dunkers in the world. And yeah, I had an opportunity to dunk in front of an enormous crowd on a dedicated half court with jumbotrons and crane cameras. And
wow.
So that, and then the following day we did a dunk session in a nearby street ball arena that's actually located under overpasses. So it was like this kind of graffiti, kind of like a Russian Rucker Park type of vibe. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Holy cow, that's amazing. Holy cow. All right, so let's jump into it. So where are you from?
So I'm from Harrow, Ontario, Canada. So just outside of Windsor, Ontario, which is a border city to Detroit, Michigan.
All right. And yeah, growing up, what were your sports?
Yeah, so I was a multi-sport athlete, through high school. It was really, for me, the big 3 were volleyball, basketball, and track and field. And that's what I kind of followed into the collegiate years as well, and ended up doing track and field for the University of Windsor here in Canada.
Excellent. Yeah. And how was that experience, being a track athlete? And I think you guys had some national championships along the way.
Yeah, we had, thankfully, I was part of the University of Windsor's team during kind of the legacy run. It's a very historical point for University of Windsor Lancers, where we did win. It was 4 back-to-back national championships while being there. So I was very fortunate to be a part of a very winning team, and also had exposure to some great athletes and coaches as well. No, it was amazing. And it was my entire life at the time, right?
Yeah.
So I can't ask for anything more for sure.
Nice. And at what events did you compete in?
I was a multi-event athlete. So indoors, I did the pentathlon, which was the 60-meter hurdles, long jump, shot put, high jump, and the 1,000-meter run. So that was all done in the course of a day. So we would start. It was about a 6-hour competition in total. And then outdoors was the decathlon. So it was 10 over 2 days. And it was, about everything you can think of in the track world in a 2-day period of time. So it was a lot of training, a lot of technical training, which really informed a lot of the reason I ended up where I am now in the jump technique side of things.
Okay. And now, what was your kryptonite when it came out of the 10 sports and decathlon?
Yeah, anything that was of mid or long distance is, for the most part, all multi-eventers' bane of their existence. So the odd outlier likes the longer distance runs, but for me, indoors it was the 1,000-meter, and then outdoors was the 1,500. So if I could avoid having to train for stuff like that ever again in my entire life, I'll be as far away as possible.
And what was your go-to event? That one, like, I can't wait for that one.
Yeah, I think it would either have been, high jump, indoor for sure. Outdoor, I love the throws. So discus and javelin were 2 that I really, really enjoyed. I actually competed secondarily as an individual discus athlete as well. So I was a bit undersized. I'm a smaller thrower in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
So to be able to do that separately was definitely enjoyable. And I did it as well as a master's athlete a few years back. I competed for another summer just to kind of jump back into the competitive space, and I ended up throwing a personal best, which was crazy as a fully grown guy. So that was awesome.
Right. Holy cow. And now, what, from a track standpoint, there's, very individualized sport, and then you said you also competed, played volleyball, other team sports as well. What was the hook that track had on you versus, those other sports?
I think for me is I've always been attracted to something that was individualized in nature. So growing up, I spent a lot of time just like practicing and competing in on my own, and
Yeah.
I became very comfortable with that concept of, everything that you do, you're held liable for, and it's really just you against you. So, whether it was track and field or golf or something along those lines where I could spend time and it was really just about me getting better, I was attracted to that. When I got to University of Windsor and realized that track also had this allure of being a team sport in a very different light,
Hmm.
that was also something that was a great side effect as well, was knowing that your results would impact the overall team scores. That was fun. And I don't know, I've always been, I think, just a bit of habitual show off. Like I like the idea of like the light being kind of on you for a moment. You have the opportunity to really showcase talent in front of everybody as they watch, and that's what got me into the professional dunk space.
Yeah.
Was just the idea of being a bit of a showman and having that as an outlet was pretty cool.
All right. And then, how did being a part of that championship team shape your coaching and your approach to training? Because a lot of elite athletes, they're at the cream of the crop, but they've never had that championship. How did having that championship for you, change and affect you today?
Yeah, to be fair, Barry, I'm not entirely sure how to answer that question. Like, listen, like being a part of those teams was incredibly powerful and inspiring. But from a coaching standpoint, I think I was driven into coaching a lot more from the educational side of things. And the experiences I've had as an athlete are great, and they've given me obviously I think the spark in the right direction. But I get much more appreciation and enjoyment now out of the other side, which is watching my athletes kind of come up and
Yeah.
see their successes. So at the time, it was just another poker in the fire, I think, that got me closer to where I ended up
Yeah.
now.
All
Yeah.
right. And now, what did you end up going to school for?
Yeah, so I have a master's in human kinetics and also a teaching degree. So I finished my human kinetics degree and then decided that I wanted to be a teacher. And I ended up becoming a teacher for about 3 years while I was a personal trainer on the side. So
Yeah.
back then, around my early 20s, I would train just general population and how to get fitter and
Mm-hmm.
at some local commercial gyms, and realized pretty quickly that what I was most interested in was the education, and being a teacher. I loved it, but at the same time, there was some politics behind where I was located that I wasn't so much attracted to and
Yeah.
became very aware of over the years, right? So I realized that I had a unique opportunity to step into a space that I absolutely love, which is sport performance, and still be an educator
Yeah.
and use what I've picked up over the years in just a different light.
Yeah. All right. And now, what was your path to becoming a pro dunker? Because, that's not something, a lot of like, I'm going to be a pro dunker, especially from
Listen,
Canada.
man. Yeah, seriously. Listen, I found pro dunking through YouTube. It's the early stages of YouTube. I've been on YouTube as both a contributor and consumer since the early conception, right? We're
Yeah.
talking like 2005, 2006. Like I was on there watching these guys who in all rights were some of the best athletes I've ever seen, just doing something. I was really into growing up like NBA Jam and
Yeah.
just like again, like being this kind of habitual showman. It just immediately spoke to me. I was like, you're telling me that people can get paid to go and spend 10, 15 minutes and dunk in front of a crowd? Like that's super cool. So after consuming them on YouTube, I decided one day to go out and just throw a camera up and record myself to see if I could dunk, because I hadn't really spent any time post track and field jumping,
Yeah.
and realized that the training I did for track kind of supercharged a lot of my vertical jumping ability. And I got the bug, and then I spent the next 18 months or so just training my vertical specifically,
Yeah.
and was able to increase it quite a bit. So probably from about a 40-inch vertical to nearly 50. So I ended up with a 48-inch max vertical test
Yeah.
in my prime. So yeah, it was circumstance, just found them, and then it drew me in. I'm a creature of creative habit. I
Yeah.
love to get involved in things that seem a little bit more fringe.
And now, when did the momentum start? Like you probably entered, some local dunks contests, and then when did it started, the snowball effect happen?
Yeah, so I was reached out to by the owner at the time of a dunk team called Team Flight Brothers, which still to today is an extremely successful business. They're still contracted out to do NBA halftime shows, NCAA halftime shows, and other different events as well. So Chuck, who's a friend of mine now, reached out and asked if I wanted to come down to Florida and to dunk with him and get footage and potentially do a show. So I was kind of flown down to Florida, which that was really the very first experience I had doing this, aside from just being in a gym and putting a camera on myself. So
Yeah.
I had done a couple local little community center dunk contests that were just a bucket list thing for me to do, and ended up winning them and thinking, maybe I'm actually pretty good at this thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, he reached out and said, I'm impressed by your videos from like an athletic standpoint. We need to work on your dunks themselves, but I could jump very high at the time, and he could tell I loved it. So it definitely kind of lit that fire for the next 3 to 5 years, where I did many more events and traveling for it.
Yeah. Oh wow. And now was Moscow the sort of the top, like, holy cow, this is the pinnacle?
Yeah, it was probably the coolest singular dunking experience I had, just because of its uniqueness, right? Like
Mhm.
I don't think otherwise I would have traveled to Russia. Like it wasn't on my bucket list to
Yeah.
go to Moscow. But when I was reached out to about it, it just made perfect sense. It was quite the process, to be honest, to go there and actually do the show, with traveling 3-4 hours to the nearest embassy to get visas
Yeah.
and all that. So in order for me to be there for, I think, a total of just under 4 days, so it was like a day of travel there. We woke up the next day, competed. The next day we sight saw, and then we went home the next day. So it was
Yeah.
very quick, but something that is very cemented in my mind as a unique and powerful experience for sure.
All right. And now, growing up, did you watch the NBA? Did you have some favorite dunkers, or it was just track and field? You saw these videos on dunking YouTube, and that was it?
No, I grew up as a fan of basketball for sure. In my early years, that was pretty much my fixation, was basketball. Michael Jordan is quite, obviously most people's early inspiration
Yeah.
for jumping. The early MJ documentaries that came out were something that I watched on repeat.
Yeah.
The World Championship U.S. Dream Team,
Mm-hmm.
with Shaq and Sean Kemp, and like that, I watched a VHS of that actually over and over again, and burned out a VCR player. For those that are watching and have no idea what a
Yep.
VCR player is, just Google it.
Yep.
Just Google it. And then it was Vince Carter. I was local. He was Toronto Raptors when
Oh
he
yeah.
first started, and he inspired the mass majority, I would say, of professional dunkers in my generation were, Vince Carter inspired.
Yeah.
The 2000s dunk contest was something that is still, for most people, a core memory, and something that I remember exactly where I was, what I was doing when I saw him have the night of his life. So Vince Carter for sure. Then I followed the Raptors for quite some time. When
Yeah.
he had moved and then Tracy McGrady had moved, I started losing a bit of interest in just like watching basketball. And it's largely because I realized like the league had become very player centric,
Yeah.
as opposed to team centric. And for me, it was, once they were gone, that team was a bit broken up for me. And I peripherally keep my eye on on the NBA now. But to be perfectly honest, I'm probably, when people meet me, they expect me to be just like constantly consuming sports and watching sports.
Yeah.
To be fair, like I don't watch a ton of sports myself. Like obviously I'm involved in the industry,
Mhm.
and I work with athletes on a daily and weekly basis. But my own personal interests definitely lie some without or outside of the field of sport for sure.
Okay. Yeah. So I grew up, I'm a little older than you. My pinnacle dunking era was, Spud Webb, Dominique, and Jordan. And Spud Webb was my guy. 5'8". Growing up in Newfoundland, we just had, there's no ESPN. So it was like, like you said, VHS tapes, like, how did he do that? And then
Yeah.
in the magazines, they had those corny jumping shoes. There's like, little
The jump soles.
Yes. Like there's a platform on these things. It's like,
Yep.
surprised you didn't break your ankles, but to where it is today, the jump training programs that are in place and whatnot, it's just phenomenal. So, but coming back to your transition from being a track athlete to professional dunker, what were some of the biggest challenges from a technique or because you had a hoops background, maybe you sort of already knew how to do layups and dunks and stuff?
Yeah, the biggest glaring difference for me was that in the world of track and field, all jumping is single leg, right? It's off one. So
Right.
whether it's long jump, high jump, triple jump, or even the act of hurdling, it's off of a singular leg. When I got into the dunk world, The coordination I had for dunking off 1 foot was a bit sporadic. And then I'd realized pretty quickly that I had a propensity for 2 foot jumping. Like it was something that I'm a bit of a bit heavier of an athlete when it comes to a jumper, like especially
Hmm.
at the time. Being a multi-eventer, you tend to be a bit bigger, right? So about 6'1", 200 pounds. And for a jumper, like that might be looked at as being a bit heavy. So 2 feet for me helped to distribute, I think, just a bit more of the forces. And so that was the transition for sure from 1 to 2 feet, and the coordination involved in that was some time. And that's why I got so fixated on understanding technique beyond just positions. It was really just like, what are the root behaviors of the way someone moves through a jump approach? And I became very fixated on that. And that helped me a great deal with making that transition. But I would say that was definitely the most challenging portion, was just kind of recalibrating, my jump.
Yeah. All right. And now, what was your go-to dunk? What was your favorite dunk you
Mm.
love to do?
Yeah, I mean, I was probably better known for what are called self-bounce variations. So it's
Hmm.
like, you're familiar with an alley-oop or throwing a lob to yourself, which is like throw the ball, let it bounce, catch it in the air. But if you approach with the ball and you actually bounce it during your approach and then catch it on the run, essentially, I could do the bag of my dunks off of that type of variation. So I could do everything from between the legs, behind the back, 360s, windmills, and everything off of that self bounce variation.
Yeah.
So it became a little bit better known for that. And then I don't know if I could pick any dunk to do and go back and do once, probably an off the backboard slingshot, which is where you basically just throw it off the backboard as hard as possible,
Hmm.
jump, and you ride the ball back as far as it possibly
Yeah.
goes, and you try to stretch out and get big and then dunk it really hard. So I like to dunk really, really hard.
All right. There we go.
Yeah.
And now, what was the key factor, like in achieving, like you said, almost a 50-inch vertical jump? Was there a breakthrough moment in your training that, like, you got, a bigger boost and it's like, wow, where did that come from?
Yeah, I think it was once I started to point my training in a very specific direction. Like with track and field, we did general strength conditioning. And to be perfectly honest, during my collegiate years, I don't think I was as focused on the work off the track as I could have been.
Hmm.
And largely, I had been doing track for so long that I had become competent in it. And I don't know what it was. I just got a bit stagnant with it. So when track ended and I kind of had this brand new challenge facing me, it was, I need to exhaust all options to figure out how to maximize my vertical jump. So I was pointing all of my training toward one specific output, where track as a multi-eventer is so many different things. And, I did a lot more single leg and single limb training post track and field. And I found that really improved my body's ability to be stable, which allowed me to bring in more approach acceleration. And ultimately, with being a very elastic athlete, like I'm very, dense tendons from all the sprinting and jumping on
Hmm.
the hard track, the more speed I could have bring into my approach and then just kind of redirect it with a really strong break, I was jumping higher and higher and higher. So the joint stability that I developed from shifting a lot of focus of my training into joint stability and single limb movements, I think it also improved my, rotational core strength and all those factors that made a big, because I had been, squatting and deadlifting and cleaning like the majority of athletes beforehand. It was just finding out the subtleties of jumping that made a big difference for me. And then also the amount of time that I, pointed the magnifying glass at technique
Yeah.
was completely, um, you know, I can't think of one singular thing that helped more than just dialing in the efficiency of my approach.
Okay. All right. And then, at the end of your, when pro dunking, you wrap that up. Was that when you started to focus on sort of, being focused on jumping as a, a specific training aspect?
I had peripherally, provided education content, coaching in the jump world before my retirement. So I retired from the pro dunk scene just before I turned 30 years old. And it was really, my hand was forced in a lot of ways due to an injury that I sustained. And it was at that time that I pointed the majority of my energy toward the coaching side. But I've been doing it as an athlete as well, peripherally. It just became my entire primary focus after my athletic career had taken a big
Yeah.
shift.
All right. And how would you summarize your overall jump philosophy?
My overall jump, I think it's best summed up in just a singular statement. So there's a phrase that I actually have it tattooed on my body, but it's in Spanish. That's a different story. It's
Okay.
the concept of sometimes we must slow down in order to speed up. And it's an overarching vibe to my entire philosophy of training is it's important to stop to glean a little bit bigger perspective on the entire scope of what you're doing more frequently. You tend to get lost in the noise of just the journey of being an athlete. And before you know it, months and years have gone by. So every now and then, just taking a moment to stop and assess exactly where you're at in your training was very, very important for me. And something that I do with my athletes constantly as well. But singular philosophy, yeah, would be that. It would just be keeping a much more mindful eye on all facets of what you're chipping away at.
All right. And now you sort of have two things. You have the art of jumping, and then you also have Project Pure Athlete. So let's go with Project Pure Athlete. What is that, first of all?
Yeah, so Project Pure Athlete is a company that I founded back in 2011. It's actually, I no longer own Project Pure Athlete, but I was the founder of it. So it's now in the hands of my former partner, Chase Skinkiss, who lives out in Las Vegas. But I got to a point in my career where Project Pure Athlete was something that was incredibly powerful to me. I built it. It was my baby. It was kind of the bedrock of my methodologies and my philosophies. But I got to a point where I came to a kind of a professional shift in chapter. It's like I was moving from this more sport performance centric portion of my life now into this much more educator focused and like jump technique. So I needed this transition. I had exhausted everything I could do with Project Pure Athlete. So at the time I just was, Chase had put so much time into the business as well. I said, if you want it, it's yours. And I kind of made that transition. So it opened the door for the art of jumping, which is really where my true passion lies.
Okay.
In teaching my jump technique methods to as many people as possible, from athletes to coaches and club owners, and just trying to get these as integrated into the sinew of really what volleyball and performance sport is. It's like it's efficiency, right?
Yeah.
That's at the end of the day, it's about building competence and efficiency in the sport.
Yeah. And probably not easy. You guys are on opposite ends of, Vegas and, Ontario, of trying to, run a company and whatnot. So, that's good.
Absolutely. That was definitely part of the shift too. It's, we had gotten to slightly different points in our own careers where he's a very, very talented coach and trainer, and he wanted to do one thing with it. And I'm thinking, like, I'm at this point in my career, I've done that portion for years prior. So, you go and do your thing. I'm going to go and do my thing. We're still super cool. We talk all the time.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I think we're in a better place for it.
All right. And now, the art of jumping. So what is sort of the basis and foundation for art of jumping?
Yeah, the art of jumping is really trying to shine a lens on what creates jump efficiency beyond just lifting weights in the weight room. I think for many, many years, that's been what jump training is. It's, more relative strength, less body fat, and you jump higher. Or conversely is the mentality that you either have it or you don't, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you can't naturally jump high, then there's no real reason to train your jump beyond that, because you either have it or you don't. So I wanted to show and demonstrate to as many people as possible that no matter who you are, from a technical perspective, you can add immediate efficiency to your jump, which helps you tap into more of the strength and power that you already have in your body at this moment, right? So I think for the mass majority of athletes, they are still underperforming. Even though they might be progressing in the weight room and getting stronger, there are still these subtle nuances in a jump that when you understand and feel and learn how to build those deeper connections, you're able to get more out of your body on every attempt, and then conversely conserve more energy on every jump because it's more efficient, which means you're carrying more of a jump endurance through multiple games and multiple sets and multiple matches.
Okay.
So yeah, the art of jumping is a light onto the art of jumping. It's that it's bigger than just strength and power. There's a finesse and truly an art to performing jumping at a very high level.
All right. And now, do you target, certain clients, a certain age, certain sport?
So volleyball is most definitely the largest market that I deal with. I mean, volleyball in essence is 2-foot jumping at its highest showcased level. So to be able to provide philosophies and programs and kind of a step-by-step method to be able to overhaul your jump approach and make you more comfortable with it. And volleyball made a lot of sense. But I work with basketball players. I work with bucket list athletes of all ages, guys that may be in their, 40s, 50s, and 60s that are like, I've always wanted to just dunk a basketball.
Oh, no way.
Can I come in and see you for a couple sessions and we can kind of tweak some things? So now as a specialty coach, I do a lot more of what I call the gravy, right? So the frontline strength conditioning coach is going to put in that like daily grind work with athletes, which I did for many, many years. But now what I do is I get these athletes that are going through training and I get them in this really specific setting where we get to do that detail work and really help them add all that extra sauce to their jump.
All right. So how do you approach training the athletes who, come from the different athletic backgrounds, like, from track versus team sports?
For the most part, I don't get a lot of track athletes through. I think I consult with track athletes more than anything, but it's really more on the lifting performance side. Track is really good in the sense that the basis of that sport is really stitched into building natural rhythm and coordination and connectedness. Like the drills from track and field themselves build a lot of really important connections that people in other sports don't necessarily get exposure to. So I've taken a lot of what I learned in track and field and brought it to the 2-foot jumping space to help benefit like more so team sport athletes, which is, can we train jumping in a bit more of a vacuum at times to be able to build maximal efficiency there so that when it's transitioned back onto the court of play, if you have competence in that singular skill, just like you would train any other skill in volleyball, right? So if you're training your serve, if you're training your attack, it's understanding that the attack is actually two distinct skills, right? So we have the approach and then we have the completion, the swing, and kind of tying everything together. But for the most part, volleyball players train their jump only as a byproduct of training the attack. So hitting lines, and they'll spend extra time maybe just standing on a box and swinging and finishing the attack at the top end. But why aren't these front end mechanics worked on more and built at a higher level of efficiency? So that's kind of what I do predominantly with the volleyball space and basketball space for that matter as well. It's just build more competence in the jump so that when you're in an environment that you can use it, you just feel like you have more access to your jump.
Okay. And with volleyball, you really have the two different types of jumps. You have the attack, the approach 1-2 jump, and then you also have that blocking, which is more standing and, so do you approach those in different skills and different lessons and whatnot?
Absolutely. So it's, once we determine like really what a jump is, so both from a stationary standpoint in a blocking fashion and an approach standpoint, then we start to work them into more fitting scenarios in a game. So it's like we take the basis of what we call like jump technique in a vacuum, and then how does that transfer into the game? So whether it's swing blocking, whether it's approach from different angles on the court, realistically, those principles will overlap no matter what you're doing. With a standing jump, a lot of the work I do with athletes for improving just the mechanics of the stationary block jump is understanding how the body utilizes, creates, and releases energy. I think people are often coached in the volleyball space to two things. One is the concept of get low to get high. I think is something that most volleyball players have heard since their inception into the sport. And unfortunately, it's coached with little nuance. There's not enough context into what that statement is. So when an athlete is a jumper that doesn't necessarily visually get very low, a coach might say, you got to get lower, you got to get lower, you got to get lower, but not realizing that jumpers will be really determined along a spectrum. Okay. So that what we call a jump archetype, you're either a predominantly more elastic driven or tendon driven jumper, or a contractile power driven jumper where you really like those longer ground contact times, something where a lower jump would be beneficial for that type of person. But if you're an elastic jumper, if you're someone that's very tendon driven, if I ask you to get low and jump, you'll actually jump quite a bit lower than you would if you were to do a much more quick preparatory phase. Yeah. So helping athletes to really determine like what type of jumper they are will allow them to utilize more precise movement strategies in the moment to be able to jump at their best.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've seen so many girls, I help coach a volleyball team. I see so many girls, they come in, they just plant their 2 feet, and then they go up. They don't transition that power, that speed, momentum forward. And then that arm swing is that arm swing is so important. There's so much more than just swinging your arm and jumping. It's your core, you're getting low and arm swing.
Right. And it's how do you marry those all together, right? All those concepts individually make a lot of sense. We need to prep the athlete's center of mass at a low point. We need to find out what that low point is. But not enough discussion is being done on like, well, when does that lowering happen and why does it happen at that time, right? I think what we see as like very common pain points for athletes in their jump is something called late lowering. Okay, so you'll see an approach jump where the athlete is going through their initial strides. They make that pass through that longer stride called our penultimate stride. And then we get this dip at the end of their jump where the plant foot and then the block foot, which is the last foot, hit the ground. And then we get this very dramatic visual late lowering up into the jump. And what that's indicative of is a late lower is very indicative of deceleration. So an athlete losing speed. And at that point, you can rest assured that that athlete is not going to transition a lot of that beautiful initial approach energy through their toe off.
Right.
So it's becoming aware that we want to preset our hip height or our center of mass a little bit earlier in the jump. And as we do that, it becomes very progressive. So as the approach steps start, the hips gently fall as if you were to say be stepping off of a very shallow curb. Hips are going to get a bit lower. As we get to the preparation of that penultimate stride, that longer stride, we should be at or getting to our low point there, so that as we transition through the penultimate, the hips are transitioning fairly level to the ground, so that when those last two contacts happen, it's more of a redirection moment, right? So the plant foot comes down, the block foot, which is the last foot, is the redirection mechanism. So when that foot hits the ground, it's like a pole vault pole getting stuck into the cup, right? We create a fulcrum for the athlete to move around. So if we get that low point a little bit earlier, they're going to be on the ground for a lesser amount of time relative to their output, and they're going to jump quite a bit higher for them. And like you're saying, the arm swing is very important, but it's also understanding that the arm swing, the back and forth motion, the benefit we get from it is a lot less about creating this forward extension power and much more about what the arms are doing in concert with the feet, is that they're creating a complementary downward striking force into the ground, which gives more return energy up. So when we don't have those timed up well enough, we start to, again, we lose more potential. We lose room for that higher end outputs. That's why I'm kind of famously known for being able to work with an athlete over the course of a few minutes and add 1, 2, 3, 5 inches to their jump, simply based on getting them into a position that their body is better designed for.
Yeah. And now, speaking of working with the athletes, you have your program that people can, log into and watch your videos. Working directly with you, without you being in person, are you able to do it through Zoom or FaceTime, or is that sort of limiting right now?
So I've been approached for that, and I've done some of that in the past. So more remote sessions. The problem is at this point, I am kind of trying to tidy up the way in which my business is kind of presented, right?
Yeah.
So on one end, like you're saying, I have my digital courses and mini courses where through the app Teachable, which has been a really cool platform, you can go in and you can follow along with, lecture series and really just learn at a deeper level on your own time. In person, I have the in-person services. So that gap bridging right now is something that I don't really have a solution for currently. It's really a time issue,
Right.
Barry.
Yes.
At the end of the day, like when you're essentially one of one in the space that I'm in, and especially in the volleyball space, as someone that works exclusively on the approach, my time gets a little bit thinner. So to be able to open a new project becomes a little bit more daunting.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, how have you seen the world of vertical jump training evolve since you began? What has changed the most, technique or technology?
I think it's fair to say a lot has changed. Both the aforementioned ones you said there definitely have changed. Technology, our exposure to a variety of training regimes has definitely been exposed. I think along with the technology of, say, social media has come a lot of benefit, but there's also become a lot of risk involved in that as well, which is you can't really vet everybody that you consume information from. So you have to kind of assume that where it's coming from is from a place, a good place, right? An educated place. So that could be challenging to deal with. Technique in the jump space has been something that, I've been pushing for going on 2 decades now. And thankfully that work has paid off. And I hear that vocabulary used more readily. So that to me is like a big check mark for my career and being very thankful that people have picked up on it and, kind of integrated into their structure as well. Training wise, I think the coaches and trainers side of things, like we've definitely improved our exposure and understanding of training and how to train an efficient jumper. So that's been really nice to see as well. So I think it's been a combination of multiple things that have improved. It's really, at the end of the day, it's exposure to more people doing training and getting results that encourages more people to see the benefit in it. And I think we're starting to weed out those old mentalities of you either have it or you don't, or, don't, especially female volleyball. That's the primary market that I deal with is, female athletes come see me from all over the place because they've either been told like, you need to work on your approach, or you don't jump very high, or, you're a lib and you don't need to work on your jump. And it's like, well, why would you ever tell somebody that? Like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me that you would just pass off the work needed to help someone get better. Aside from, it's a business and we're looking for the quickest return on investment. So find someone taller versus help someone else improve athletically. So that's where I come in. I'm just here to hopefully help people be more confident in their athleticism.
Right. And, do you see a common, like, this is kind of a vague question, but what do you see most common that you like a quick fix to help somebody? Like if, if somebody's looking for a piece of advice, for a beginner to help increase their vertical jump, is there like, here's a couple of quick things that would really help you?
Yeah. So number one is going to be jump more often. Not to just, sorry about the analogy, but not to beat a dead horse with a stick, right? It's not just, don't just like perform your current jump over and over and over and over again. It's just get more exposure to jumping based contact. So, I mean, that's just proven science that more exposure we have to those elastic, higher rate of force development movements, the quicker and more explosive we become long-term. So that's number one, is just exposure more frequently. Number two is not to sleep on the effects of higher level efficiency and technique. And one of the quickest and easiest ways to overhaul your technique is really to play around with what's called your maximum controlled velocity. Okay, so that's the quickest way to figure out how to jump higher. A lot of times athletes are actually bringing in too much speed relative to their strength levels. Because there's a lot of information. Yeah, there's a lot of information that circulate around social media on more speed, the better, right? Quicker speed helps you jump higher, but it only helps you jump higher if you have the requisite strength and stability to support and redirect that new energy. So 9 times out of 10, I get an athlete jumping higher by actually slowing them down just a little bit.
Okay.
So that's something to keep in mind for a lot of athletes, especially undertrained athletes. If you are new to volleyball and perhaps, you spend the majority of your time just in practices and games and don't have off-court training yet, the likelihood is that your general strength levels are just not high enough to support the demand of the technique that you're placing on it. So that's why technique and strength conditioning, they should be married together, constantly worked together forever, and not just as a band-aid, right? Technique is not a band-aid, just like in the realm of, let's say, weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting. The most explosive and strongest athletes in the world in a lot of cases are clean and jerking and snatching hundreds of pounds from the floor over their head. And they touch empty barbells, pieces of PVC piping on a practice to practice basis, meaning that yes, they can move 300, 400, 500 pounds off the ground, but they're still patterning technique every single session.
Okay.
So to me, it's like there's no difference to a jump being the most explosive, movement pattern we have as human beings. We're taking our entire mass and lifting it off the earth. There has to be technique to that.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, maybe it'll get better. No, it 100% will be better if your technique is better. It's science.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I swear, I swear to God, you got my questions in front of you, because my next question was, what role does strength training play in jump improvement, and how do you balance it with technique focused training? And, they go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand. And I think, one of the struggles I deal with, especially in the volleyball space, and all about this, is the demands and the volume of volleyball that is played by athletes nowadays. It's immense, right? I mean, these athletes are year-long, multiple practices a week, tournaments on weekends, from indoor to beach, back to indoor to beach. And there's no real off-season. There's no real time for what we call like off-season training. So then we get these athletes that are desperate to improve their athleticism, desperate to improve an injury that's sustaining and won't go away, whether it's shins or whether it's
Yeah.
knees or whether it's ankles, and wondering why they're not making the progress they're looking for. It's that largely the exposure to volleyball is just far surpassing what the needs of that athlete are, which is a little bit more time on creating a more robust and resilient body
Hmm.
to support the demands of what they're really looking to accomplish. That's really the advice I give to most volleyball parents and athletes is when they ask me, what do I do to help my long-term progress? In a lot of cases, it's play less volleyball.
Yeah.
And I know that's hard to hear for an athlete. I mean, as an athlete, I can remember that concept and thinking, well, I just love playing volleyball. Why would I not play it? So no, it's what you're doing is you're watching out for future you. You're trying to create the athlete that you want to be, right? We're not just stuck in the athlete we currently are. So you've always got to be making those deposits for future you.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I've had the coach from Creighton on, Kirsten Barenthal Booth, and she says one of her things is right now, today's, volleyball players, there's no time for recovery. We're not even talking college. The kids in high school playing club. Club goes till summer, and then summer you start with your camps, and then high school ramps back up. And these young athletes have no time to recover. And you talked about, again, my next question was going to be, how do you approach injury recovery for these jumpers? Because you have, like you said, knees, shins, and ankles. And, you get an ankle injury, it is so hard to come back from those things.
Yeah, it's mentally hard to come back from primarily. When you damage your ankles or you damage your Achilles, anything to do with your feet, it can be that mental hurdle of like, will it happen again? When will it happen again? I think one of the lowest hanging pieces of fruit for ankle injuries is largely in so protocol in place for strengthening ankles should be paramount. I mean, it should be at the team level, in my opinion. Part of a warm up should be exposing athletes to just toe, heel, and ankle walks, just to get the ankles a little bit more exposed to different ranges of motion. So one of the things that the volleyball culture is well known for are ankle braces and knee sleeves and all these different things that are to provide additional stability. But from a sheerly physiological standpoint, when we place external support over any joint, unless the injury is fresh, right? So like an ankle brace's intentions are for post ankle injury. We're talking, days after. For an athlete that still is trying to play and get reps in, the ankle brace is there to help provide that short-term stability, the pressure to be able to downregulate some pain. But as that injury is to be recovered over time, that ankle brace's intention is to come off, is to go back to reliance and building natural stability and support through that joint. But when we just leave it on there because we're afraid of spraining our ankle, we're creating longer term instability, right? By keeping that on there, our brain recognizes external support and down regulates a lot of the stabilization to those joint structures. So we get a real disservice done to athletes in the face of fear from the coach or even from the parents as well,
Yeah.
And I understand, listen, I am a parent and the idea of my child becoming injured is scary.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's going to be, again, watching out for future you. If protecting my kid this game is the most important thing, cool. But like for me, it's what protects my child and their anatomy for the longest term period of time, which is going to be making sure we're really focusing on getting those ankles strong. I sprain my ankle all the time. So one of the biggest changes I made personally as an athlete was switching from a higher topped shoe to a low top shoe. I'm actually sitting. One second here. I'm sitting in front of my retired pair. So this is the last pair of shoes that I competed in. Okay. These are Kobe 9s and they're lows. Okay. So I exclusively wore low top and really Kobe's for the last 6 years of my career. And I did not sprain my ankle even one time after switching to a low top. Now, that being said, circumstances arise, and whether you're wearing a low top, high top, or an ankle brace, if you land in the right way, you're going to hurt yourself.
Right.
But the best chance we have long-term at ankle health is intrinsically. It's about building those natural connections. And I know that transition mentally, all to bring it back to that point of saying the transition is more mental than anything else when it comes to an ankle injury.
Yeah.
So getting out of those ankle braces in practice settings when you can, in the off-court training in the gym. When I get a new volleyball player in here and they come in for their first training session with me and they're strapping up double ankle braces and knee pads, like you can take all that off. right? We might not even put your shoes on today.
Yeah.
And it's about getting those initial lessons learned that long term our body is really requires access to stimulus in order to heal.
Yep. Excellent. Yeah, and the other thing I was interested in to get your take on this. We're seeing this in college where they're doing load management. Monitoring how many times kids are jumping and whatnot. I don't think we're seeing that in the club or high school. Definitely not seeing it at high school level. Because they're looking at how many times our kids are swinging. That's starting to pop up, like with baseball. Monitoring pitchers in their arms. They're starting to look at that from a swinging aspect for hitters, but from a jumping standpoint, I haven't heard much outside of some of the colleges, doing load management. What's your take on how many jumps is too much for, a young kid to, do?
Yeah, I think that's it's a pretty deep question, but I 100% agree that load management should continue to be an improved focus for performance coaches and team coaches. So for me, as a former pro dunker, I did that inherently. So as I started training more and more, and I was a pro dunker, your training basically revolves around entirely jumping.
Right.
Okay, like all we're doing is jumping and jump related stimulus. So for a session, I was a very highly trained athlete. To give you some context here, I would warm up, very progressive dynamic warm up, almost think track based warm up. And I would work through submaximal jump contacts, about 10 to 15 submaximal jumps, working up in intensity till I hit about 100%. And then it was anywhere from 25 to 50, depending on the time of year, of jumps that I would do in a given session before I would just cut it off. Even if I felt really good, I would cut that off at a certain point to preserve not only the joint structures, but also the nervous system, right? It's about nurturing that nervous system. So for younger athletes, it's relative to force output, right? So the stronger you get and the higher you jump, the more force you produce on takeoff, but more importantly, the more force you absorb on landing, right? We know landing forces can be anywhere from 3 to 5 times the amount of force of takeoff forces. So then load management becomes more important in greater scale, the more trained an athlete becomes over time. So for a young athlete, as long as we are taking some downtime, which is kind of the argument we're dealing with right now, load management shouldn't necessarily have to be a primary focus, but because everybody's exposed on a yearly basis, more frequently just stopping athletes when they still feel fresh and kind of chopping off repetitions is going to benefit them long term. A number, it's going to be very athlete specific of how many jumps to take. So it's hard to give make sure you're not doing any more than 20 jumps in any given session. That's just not feasible for most team structures. No. But for instance, when they come in to see me here, most often I don't necessarily jump them very often. If I'm dealing with an in-season athlete, they're coming in and we're really just doing maintenance. We're just doing body maintenance. I'm trying to keep them on the court. That's what a coach is supposed to do. Our primary function is keep you playing the sport that you play. Yeah. It wouldn't serve them any well to have them in here performing a bunch of additional plyos and jumping. So you can work jumping with things that don't look like jumping at all. Yeah.
All right. And then, adding into the, you're talking about shoes, how important are the insoles? Because you see a lot of these like flimsy insoles you get from, the big shoes, and then you also have that whole marketing aspect of, hey, this insole will help you jump higher or prevent injuries. Somebody who's involved in the jumping aspect, shoes, insoles, what's your take on that aspect?
Okay, shoes are incredibly important. Now, let me provide all the context to that. Okay, so number one, most important thing about a pair of shoes for an athlete, they should feel comfortable. Okay, if the shoe on your foot feels comfortable and you have confidence in the shoe when you put it on, it's probably a good shoe for you. That being said, there's some other things to keep in mind. One is we talked about the height of the like mid, high, or low top cut. I prefer a mid to low cut for jumping based athletes. I think it's best for motion and mobility as well as developing long-term stability. I like a shoe personally that has a bit more ground feel. So some shoes will have like a lot of airbags. Yeah. And those airbags, depending on what type of jumper you are, can impact your quality of jump. So if you're a very elastic dominant athlete and you have very quick ground contacts, we know these athletes, their takeoffs or their approaches are like lightning fast, right? Yeah. Their approach, they're off the ground before you can see them. An airbag based sole for an athlete like that is going to feel really funky. It's going to feel like a lot of shearing forces. Like you'll feel the sole hit the ground and then the upper will continue to move. Whereas I showed you a Kobe It's a big ground feel. It's like your foot, the rubber, and the ground. And I like that for a more elastic based athlete. So it's determining what type of jumper you are can be very helpful for that. Insole wise, and I know what we're kind of talking about peripherally without saying the exact name.
Yeah.
Insoles to me, unless it's like an orthopedic based insole for some sort of specific foot condition, it's whether or not it makes you feel like you're jumping well than anything else. Is there science to support insoles and output? Sure, but it's probably in less of a fashion than we think. So there's a more famous insole floating around right now that athletes and stuff are promoting. Without saying the name, which I'm not going to do. I was approached by that company 3 years ago, and they said, "Hey, we want to send you some of the insoles. We're confident that you'll love them and that you'll market them to all your athletes." So they sent them over to me, a couple different sizes. I actually, myself and a bunch of my athletes tested it over the 3 different jump parameters. So we did an approach jump, we did a standing counter movement jump, and we did a broad jump. I tried to get jumps that tax the body and the feet in very different ways. Right. Approach jump is very rotational. A lot of shearing forces to the foot. Standing counter movement jump, a little bit more straight up and down. Broad
blocking type thing.
Right. And then your broad jump is going to be placing a lot more emphasis on linear speed and movement. 5 athletes, 3 tests apiece, and we had a cumulative change across all tests and all athletes of 0.75 inches. So not quite 1 inch difference when you added up everybody's results over it. And it was the only change we saw was on a broad jump, because the way the insoles work are much more linear in fashion. Even how they're demonstrated, they're bent in half and released this way. Whereas we get a lot more rotational loading into an approach jump. So listen, can you jump higher with them in your shoe? Maybe, but how much of that is down to the actual technology of the insole? I'm not confident to lend my professional opinion on it unless I was to do like deep laboratory testing on it.
All right. Excellent. And now, another thing that, especially with the kids in high school and whatnot, and, the club, nutrition, your kids, you got to eat healthy, and, they're, mowing down a bag of chips or something like that. From a jumping aspect, have you noticed any certain, aspects of nutrition that help jumpers, or just as an athlete, you need to pay more attention to your nutrition?
Yeah, I think there's some, general athletic nutrition supports just very, a focus more so on just the macronutrient intake, right? Making sure that you're getting good, healthy amounts of protein, fats, and carbs to support the output that you're trying to accomplish. So to say eating these types of foods is best for you, I think is tough, because households are very different from one another. So I find that places a lot of pressure on athletes to say you have to be eating this type of food to perform at this type of level. I think it's just mitigating exposure to things that don't provide you nutrition, right? It's just getting things that are a little bit more pure protein sources in, meats, nuts, right? Things that actually have protein in them, versus labels with infinite length of chemicals in them. At the end of the day, water intake is a low-hanging fruit for sure. Most people don't drink nearly enough water to support the amount of output they have, largely because they say I just don't like water. Well, unfortunately, your body's 70% of it, so you better like it a little bit.
You mean those caffeine drinks, those energy drinks?
Right.
They're not magical.
Right. I don't know. I mean, we have to double check our blood panels to see how much of our body is Red Bull oriented.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, nutritionally, it's if you know what it is and you know where you got it from, the likelihood is that it's pretty okay to put it in there. The easiest thing is shop the outside of the grocery store, right? They say stay in the outside of the grocery store. But realistically, from a coach perspective, what I would tell an athlete is just make sure you're keeping up your water intake. You're eating regularly throughout the day, and focus on performance versus aesthetic. I think that was the big thing with me growing up, was there was so much in the track and field space with aesthetic and performance and having to look a certain way and have a body fat at a certain level that it if you're not careful, it can create some unhealthy relationships between athletes and food. I think that's a very sensitive area for
Yeah.
sure. But doing your best to just eat consistently, eat foods that are that you understand and make sense to you. Supplementation is another area that you can definitely expose yourself to. It's never going to take the replacement of food, but at the end of the day, if you're a highly trained athlete with pretty good nutrition plan, supplementation is pretty standard for athletes of, you know, later teen and into their 20s and
Yeah.
30s for sure.
All right. And now, what do you see as the future of vertical jump training? Are there any new techniques or technologies you're excited about?
At this time, like I think jump training is in a pretty good spot right now. What the future of it looks like, I think my hope is that even more stock is placed in exposure to the technical side of jumping. I think we've got a great industry of performance training and strength and conditioning. That's something that's been around for many, many, many decades. But the acceptance of vertical jump technique on a broader scale is something that I've working my whole career towards.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, a successful career is if those methods that I've been dedicating my life to make it into more of the developmental levels of volleyball clubs, of different businesses around the world where they're just, like athletes are being shown some very, very important things that help them avoid bad habits over the years. I think that's a successful career for me for sure. And then more coaches that have and feel armed with that information as well.
Now, do you work with other coaches to help transfer your knowledge to them to help them coach other athletes on being better jumpers?
Yeah. So thankfully now we have over 200 certified coaches underneath my methods that are kind of spread around the world right now. I also am working currently on building out essentially like a school membership where people can come on board as coaches, get access to an immense library worth of resources, as well as become certified as a member of that as well. So I'm approached largely by club owners, club coaches, high school coaches that are looking for any way to help their athletes understand the jump. So that's where a lot of my energy is spent right now, Barry, is really just trying to build out my school.
Yeah.
And as a teacher, I got involved in teaching and I said, one day I'll figure out a way to marry all this together in the perfect way. And it's looking like that in the near future for me. Excellent. For sure.
And now another area that's sort of, you have to get into is your content creation space, because, whether you're creating shorts, you have your, videos you've compiled together and built and whatnot, but also to keep your name out there, you've got to be on top of your socials, your shorts, your TikToks, that's something you probably never even thought you'd, have to, edit videos and whatnot.
Oh man. So when I was a dunker, part of it was, you had to upload clips of yourself dunking. And I remember having like the early iMovie software on my computer and, just kind of rudimentarily like chopping up content and adding a song to it.
Right.
And and thinking it was awesome. Like, this is so cool. I can make a video myself. But over the years, what I started realizing was that I developed this kind of, tertiary passion for the creative side of video editing and telling my story. And creativity is something that's definitely near and dear to my heart. If you meet and work with me in person, people are pretty quick to understand that I'm not a traditional coach in the sense that I'm not going to sit there. Like, I'm not the traditional strength coach. I'm a bit more of a holistic approach to training in general. And that's the creative side of my brain. It's how it works. It's how I understand things. So to be able to have that outlet through video has been pretty fun. I've been on camera for many, many years. So it was a natural transition for me for sure. And video editing is something over the years that I just became much more and more passionate about to learn how to deliver my message in an entertaining way.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're doing, is we're just competing for everybody's attention, right? At the end of the day. And how do I compete for attention and deliver a message on jump technique when in the grand scheme of things, like the concepts maybe are dry, maybe are quote unquote boring, but they're so powerful that they needed a voice.
Yeah.
So I tried to use my content to give it a voice, give it weight and levity. So the content that really blew me up was doing jump analysis. So
Yeah.
taking other people's jumps and providing context to them. Why does, what makes this person a good jumper beyond, oh, they just lift weights and they're strong? Like that's still the comment that I receive every now and then. Where like, this analysis is pointless. This athlete is a natural jumper. We can't
YouTube
learn
comments.
anything. Right. It's like, cool, man. If it's fun, you can keep living in your really narrow hallway of existence. And if that's good for you, please just stay out of the comments, because there's people in here trying to learn.
Right.
It's like we've done this with every sport up to this date. We learned from sprinters in the past and analyzing their form and their output. We analyze serving, we analyze attacking, we all these different factors. Like, why would jumping be any different? Why is it just a big broad brushstroke to jumping? You either can jump or you can't. Like, stop wasting your time with it. So thankfully, the content's been a really good vehicle to get that message across. That analysis-based content blew up my initial channel, which was Project Pure Athlete, which I built. It's kind of the first one I got over like that 100K barrier, which was a really cool experience. I never thought I'd be kind of running that little rabbit race on social media.
Right.
But I just stuck to my laurels and really just continued to be myself. Like, that's the one thing people will say when they come and spend time with me, is they say, you're exactly how you are on your videos in person. YouTube was great for getting long form content out. I would just, the content that did the best for me over time was just miking up and coaching, and then having someone follow me around with a camera. So I would just get invested in my session and coach the exact same way I would coach if the camera wasn't there. And then I put it up there, and thankfully people wanted to hang out and watch me do that. So that was really important. So I love content. I've got a really cool relationship with it. My wife and I also run a social media agency locally here. So we actually have a business where we provide services to local businesses to help them grow their followings as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a social media house.
Nice.
Yeah.
And now, if you could, after you talked about doing analysis of jumpers, who has the perfect jump from the volleyball space? Who would you say are like a couple of the top jumpers that you look at and it's like, if you want to fix your jump or you want to improve your jump, look how they do it?
Yeah, I to give you an example of a jump that I'm a big fan of from a technical standpoint. So recently I've done some work with Cody Kessel, who is just he's a phenomenal example of like elite athleticism meeting highly fine-tuned mechanics.
Yeah.
And I've talked with Cody, and he's like, it's funny because like he goes, I didn't work on my technique. I just have this technique. And I said, that's interesting, because that's the case with some of the highest end athletes, is like they become a little bit of like an outlier representation of what that jump looks like. They have efficiency because they've exposed themselves to those behaviors for a long, long period of time. And thankfully, have kind of intrinsically built that efficiency for themselves. But it's a very trainable concept to the mass majority of people that actually need it, right? I would say more people than don't need exposure to jump technique. So Cody is definitely one to be able to look into and to mimic some of those behaviors for sure.
The one I love watching is Yuki Ishikawa. The Japanese. Oh my
Ishikawa
God.
is wonderful. Nishida.
Yeah, Nishida's another one. Yeah.
But they again, they're all demonstrations of slightly different jump archetypes, right? So like a Yuji Nishida has a little bit more forward lean, a little bit more forward chest posture. So he's a bit more hip extension centric, but he's still, this is the thing, is like these big overarching concepts. And I'm sure we could do a podcast that would last like 4 days, but to like try to distill it all down to like a few sentences. So can I give like one more piece of advice?
Of course.
Barry, like,
hey, it's your podcast. We go wherever you want.
One of the areas that was lesser understood until I've thankfully been doing some work on it is the relationship of the chest to the feet. So through the longer stride, that penultimate stride, there's always been this thought that to hit a volleyball well, we always need to broad jump through the volleyball. We need to create this horizontal power into the ball, and therefore we have power transitioning through the ball to the floor, right? But the problem is like, that's not the only way to create horizontal travel. And that often comes to the detriment of vertical lift and height. So if I was to tell you, I can help you jump the same amount of distance, so you'll be able to cover the same amount of real estate, but you'll be able to have 6 inches more lift. Would you not want to take that as an opportunity?
Yeah.
So that's the work we do, is through that penultimate stride, is trying to Aim to have a little bit more of an upright chest posture. Okay. And the upright chest posture through that mid flight of the penultimate stride helps to keep a bit more of our body weight behind those last two foot contacts, the plant foot, the
Mm-hmm.
block foot. If we can keep that body weight behind those feet just a hair longer, we end up using the plant foot at a higher level because we give it slightly more time under tension on the ground. And we are able to get that redirection foot, the block foot
Mm-hmm.
down before the body passes it. So when the body passes the block foot, the takeoff vector becomes shallow.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of like net faults and people that are having a hard time actually transitioning that momentum. So what do they do instead? They slow down. They often they slow down their approach and then they lose all that speed. So we got to
Right.
find a way to allow them to bring in speed, create lift, and create distance. So it's going to be creating that nice controlled speed, having a little bit more of that upright posture through your penultimate stride, and then slightly delaying that block foot to allow for a little bit of momentum forward. So what we do is we just get more utilization of the feet and the limbs
Yeah.
while still getting a broad jump, but we're not sacrificing that chest posture that oftentimes makes it difficult to sight our pass,
Ah,
to see
okay.
our setter, to see the court. So there's just a lot of advantage to having higher efficiency of jump technique to the entirety of the game.
Right. Oh, I love this. Yeah, we could talk about this all day. Yeah. All right. So now, where can people find you?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me is through social media. So Instagram is Jump Guy Ty. So it's nice and easy. It rhymes.
Yeah.
I think it's actually there behind you. Hey,
It
on the
was.
screen.
Yep.
That's cool. You have that set up. Awesome. TikTok is Jump Guy Tyler. Unfortunately, apparently there's another Jump Guy
Wow.
Ty out there that I couldn't get that name. And YouTube, you can either search The Art of Jumping or it's youtube.com/@jumpguyty, and you can bring up my YouTube channel. So there's a few different platforms to find me there. And I'm now finalizing the last stages of my new website, which is artofjumping.ca.
Excellent. All right. And,
Yeah.
away from coaching and perfecting people's jumps, what do you enjoy to do?
I golf as much as I can. I'm definitely a golfer. It's one of those outlets for me after I got injured in my last stages of jumping and wasn't able to jump quite as frequently. I had to find an outlet, and that challenges both physically, but also more importantly, mentally, which is something that's very, very important to challenge yourself on a daily
Absolutely.
basis. So golf for sure. I have a young son, so I spend quite a bit of my time with him and trying to help him, continue to mature into the cool little kid he is. But in terms of just like my own likes, I'm very much so invested in my career to where what I do on a daily basis is largely, surrounded around educating and helping as many people as I can.
Excellent.
So yeah, golf and jumping is the majority of my life. Yeah,
All right.
and my kid.
Well, nothing wrong with that. Awesome. All right. Well, hey, Tyler, thank you so much for doing this. But before you go, like with past guests, I ask for you to shout out or recommend somebody in your circle that you think would have a good story to come on and share.
Yeah, listen, I can send you a whole bunch for sure. I think if you haven't yet, and I'm wondering if you would do it, but my good buddy Ben Patrick, who's the knees over toes guy, if you're familiar with him.
No.
Okay, so if you don't already follow Ben, knees over toes guy, he's largely popularized training that exposes athletes to a knee over toe environment and has become incredibly popular over the years. He's been on like Joe Rogan and all that stuff, and he's really open to doing to podcasts. So I'll try to reach out to him for you if I can. But other than that, I'll send you some people that I think could be very, very helpful in this space for sure.
Right.
So,
well, hey, thank you again so much for doing this, and good luck.
I appreciate that, Barry. Thanks so much for having me on.